A little bit, just a couple biographical facts, because they turn out, I think, to be germane. I was born and raised in the farm country of eastern Washington. Both sides of my family were homesteaders. My dad had a small ranch on the edge of town. I had a horse from the time I was 5. So not surprisingly, I feel quite at home in Alberta, having lived here now for half a century. Raised my family here. I teach school. I taught school at the University of Alberta. But for at least the last 30-odd years, I've been an Alberta separatist. As a political scientist, closet Alberta separatist, because I was never an activist, a proselytizer for independence. Very few people were aware of my settled view on the question. And not teaching in the field of Canadian politics, the topic never came up in any of my classes, which were devoted exclusively to the classic works of political philosophy and philosophy of science. I doubt any of my students knew of my renegade opinion. My settled view being simply the product of a rational assessment of Alberta's situation in Canada, I presume that anyone who, like me, had spent most of his adult life studying politics would agree with me that Alberta's continuing adherence in this dysfunctional confederation, wherein the province, that is the citizens of this province, get screwed year in and year out, was kind of loony. So I've long been bemused as by how little support there seemed to be for secession and independence among the Alberta populace. I simply chalked it up to ignorance and political inertia. Moreover, not being an activist by nature, I wasn't interested in wasting my time trying to move such a great sluggish beast. 14 years ago, however, the year of our centennial, 2005, some roguish fit apparently came over me. For as my contribution to the provincial celebration, I wrote a long essay entitled A Modest Centennial Proposal. Let's get while the getting's good. It was published on a whole half page of the Calgary Herald, and it generated a fair amount of interest at the time, about 97% of which was positive. But despite the cogency of my arguments in favor of the only realistic long-term solution of our chronic problem, namely our declaring independence and forming the sovereign Commonwealth of Alberta, those in charge of our province chose to ignore my sage advice. So nothing came of it, of my pot stirring, unfortunately, but not surprisingly. For although from a purely rational standpoint, then would have been an ideal time for us to make the move. For then Alberta was booming, or as my dear old dad would have said, we were riding tall in the saddle. But however logical it would have been to go independent then in the full flush of our prosperity, it was not a good time psychologically. For when times are good, people are least inclined to rock the boat, much less risk upsetting the apple cart. Whereas in less propitious times, when things are not going well, and grievances accumulate, and more people become aware of the sources, the causes, the baked-in origins of our troubles, times like now, they are more disposed to consider radical solutions. Moreover, Lady Luck has dealt us one ace, the electoral map resulting from the recent federal election, which once again made crystal clear what it means to say that our problems are baked into the structure of the Canadian polity. The Liberals were rejected by virtually the entire West from Thunder Bay to Cranbrook. They got one seat out of the, 90? But so what? Now, there's no gainsaying that declaring independence is a radical solution. And it can only be justified by our having suffered a long train of abuses, as some other republic once said, with no end in sight. This I do believe to be the case. Thus, our province was suffering through the vagaries of, while our province was suffering through the vagaries of the global oil market, we we saddled ourselves with an accidental NDP provincial government and 4 years of their ruinous policies. And I, like most of you, greeted the election of Jason Kenney and his new Conservative Party with relief and even perhaps some enthusiasm. For he was on record as having uttered a few fairly strong statements about determination to rectify some of the more egregious abuses that we Alberta have had to put up with. In fact, I was so enamored of the inherent possibility of his election, I was once again overcome by one of those mischievous fits to go public. And so once more, I made the case for independence. I composed an open letter to our new premier, calling for him to add a new position to his cabinet, a Ministry of Independence Preparation. I thought it might be more effective. I obviously didn't send a letter to Premier Kenney. I thought it more effective to have it published in that excellent online journal, C2C. So far, however, the only effect that it's had, at least as I'm aware of, is it's inspiring Mr. Hozak to invite me to address this conference. I've certainly not been contacted by Mr. Kenney, much less offered the ministry of my proposed new portfolio. Go figure. Now, admittedly, there was nothing in this open letter that I didn't say 14 years ago. Why would there be? Nothing's changed, right? The screwing we were putting up with then, we're still putting up with today. And it's not simply the outrages committed under the comically entitled equalization program, or whatever might have been its effect originally. Today, equalization is quite intentionally about the last consequence of that program. For now, it allows La Belle Province to fund its almost free daycare, token college tuition, over-generous unemployment insurance, and other welfare benefits, while still managing not only to balance its budget, but to predict a few $billion surplus. While we Albertans are staring at budgetary deficits as far as we can see darkly into the future. Of course, Quebec's exemplary fiscal management does rely on some $12 to 13 billion per year that is bestowed upon them like manna from heaven. But it doesn't come from heaven. We know where it comes from. It's sucked out of Alberta, which, if it were kept at home, would have a comparable salutary effect on our fiscal situation. As you all know, we heavily subsidize the Canada Pension Plan, paying far more into it than we get back, than comes back to Albertans. Likewise, the unemployment insurance and a panoply of other government programs. As our new premier recently complained, quoting him, in the past 5 years, Alberta's net contribution to the rest of the country was $23 billion per year, more than we got back in services. In the past years, I'm still quoting him, in the past years, it's been $200 billion, and since 1960, $600 billion. Those aren't millions, those are billions. Ladies and gentlemen, hello. These are breathtaking numbers. And if you want to quarrel with Mr. Kenney's arithmetic, cut the numbers in half. They're still breathtaking. So, does all this extorted largesse earnest the heartfelt gratitude of the rest of Canada? Ha, ha. Try disdain, resentment, contempt, vilification. But no, those terms are way too decent and civil as a description of what is amounted to an economic and legal and cultural war on Alberta and its primary industry, waged in the name of saving the planet from the hobgoblin of climate change. This unprecedented, that's the most amazing thing in my lifetime of studying politics, and I think it's the most amazing thing in the whole history of the universe. the propagandization of the Western peoples about climate change. As if we could do anything about it if we really were true believers. Whereas, and I've been following this case probably because I taught philosophy of science. It was first introduced in my class by some students who were saying, did you know that we're running the risk of within 100 years, the average temperature will raise 1 degree? And so I started treating that as a scientific problem, and I watched its permutations multiply. I've never seen, there's never, you can ask yourself, have you ever seen such a thorough indoctrination of the whole populace, but especially of our youth? It's, as I say, it's hard, not only is it unprecedented in my lifetime, I think it's unprecedented, period, in anybody's lifetime. Of course, behind it it's actually a covert attack on capitalism. The ironic fact that this war on Alberta is suicidal from the standpoint of the whole Canadian polity is cold comfort for us. But in any case, it's sure no reason for us to go down with a sinking ship. As I hope you're aware by now, I'm not in favor of solving our problems in Canada. I want out. So let's compare the benefits of exiting Canada, or of a Wexit, a term that's gaining traction, to the liabilities of staying put. First of all, if we severed our relationship with the rest of Canada, we would cut our tax burden in half and practically overnight become the most attractive economic jurisdiction in North America. Once our new situation stabilized, our population would steadily increase, perhaps double within a decade or two, since we would attract disaffected Canadians of enterprise and sensible social views from across the land, supplanting several times over the incorrigible sentimentalists attached to a Canada governed primarily for the benefit of the 2 central provinces. We need not fear overcrowding. After all, Alberta is a very big place. It is as large as the whole of Central Europe and of almost unlimited potential for rational development. Even given our present demographics, an independent Alberta would be every bit as viable politically and economically as Norway, Finland, Denmark, Sweden, New Zealand, and several other advanced countries of comparable population, but much less advantaged in resources than are we. What then are the implications of the economic implications of staying put? Well, first of all, the costs of remaining within the present Confederation are very high. Ignoring for the moment our disproportionate contribution to the Canada Pension Plan, the unemployment insurance, and other programs, simply consider the per capita cost of equalization contribution as it was when I first publicly registered my dissatisfaction back in centennial year 2005. It amounted to $4,000 per year for every man, woman, and child. That was the price we were paying, and we're paying more now. That was the price we were paying for the privilege of staying in Confederation. That's enough to provide every family of 4 a fancy new pickup every 3 or 4 years. Forget a chicken in every pot. Yeah. I offer you a fancy new pickup in every driveway. presuming that is that an independent Alberta government return the equalization savings to their own citizens. And I realize that's somewhat naive. Meanwhile, what is the money we pay? What is the money we pay for the privilege of believing in this lopsided confederation actually used for, besides Quebec payola and Aboriginal affairs mismanagement? Whatever of importance the federal government does for us could be done as well or better by a government of an independent Alberta. That is, done more efficiently, at lower cost, and in whatever manner suits us. In the short run, the savings in transfer payments, to say nothing of the enormous expense of supporting a whole nother level of government, could be used to defray the cost of our transition to independence, as I suggested would be managed by this new Ministry of Independence Preparation. But in short order thereafter, the savings applied to tax reduction would, to repeat, make Alberta the most economically attractive locale in North America. This bears directly on a second set of considerations: the economic viability of an independent Canada. Professional economists have repeatedly shown that Alberta would flourish, while our being able to offer the continent's most attractive tax regime would only further enhance that. Even now, north-south trade is important to the Alberta economy, as is east-west trade. However, the economic benefits would not be, to my mind, the most significant advantage of independence. More important to me is the fact that we would gain effective control over the social and political culture in which we live our daily lives. I'm surprised that I get any applause at all from these lines, because the last few weeks, every newspaper's been stealing my thunder. I mean, the headlines in this morning's National Post are breathtaking too. But more important is we would gain then effective control over the social and political culture in which we live our daily lives. We would no longer be subject to the dictates of Liberal appointees to the Supreme Court of Canada, pursuing a political agenda that a majority of Albertans would reject were they given the chance to vote on it. And as citizens of what would then be a fairer approximation of genuine democracy, the laws and policies of an Alberta government, sovereign but smaller and much closer to the citizenry, would reflect the views of the people who live here and pay for it. On crime and punishment, 5 minutes, good. Well, then I'm only going to have to do 2/3 of my speech. But on marriage and family matters, on educational curricula, on environmental protection, on religious freedom, on wildlife management, on firearm regulation, on narcotics, on immigration. Think of it. And most of all, perhaps, with our relationship with the United States. All without any regard for the higher enlightenment which happens to be in fashion among Toronto's pontificating classes and the mandarins of Ottawa. As an independent commonwealth, we could more effectively promote and protect a social environment that nurtures the qualities of character that we naturally admire: self-reliance, enterprise, honesty, fairness, attachment to liberty, loyalty to friends. These are the qualities that have long made Alberta a distinct society within Canada, recognizably so, as visitors familiar with the rest of the country have so often noted, not always provingly, but so what? It is a society of which each of us could be justifiably proud to be a part, and one that is tolerant but principled, that actually stands for something positive. And so it should be governed accordingly. That is, by one paramount concern, the common good of Alberta, leaving the rest of Canada shift for itself without, that is, the Alberta piggy bank handy to loot annually. Thus, in framing laws and policies, our legislators would no longer be obliged, as a matter of practicality, to keep one eye on the feds, nor allow absurd charter interpretations to determine our affairs. We would leave the problems of Canadian federalism and its endemic corruption, of which Quebec is the centerpiece, behind us once and for all. Whereas if we remain subject to the decadent cultural and moral influence of central Canada for another generation, we risk becoming infected with the qualities that since the first Trudeau era have come to define Canadian national character: sanctimonious, resentful, whining, spiteful, hypocritical, preening, feckless, weak. What a contrast to the Canadian character of an earlier generation, that which endured the Great Depression and defeated the Nazis, now barely remembered and even mocked by post-Enlightenment sectors of the population down east. For anyone who understands the political reality as presently constituted, the old Reform Party slogan of "the West wants in" is a foolish irrelevance. Our slogan should be "the West wants out." Why stay? The central government is so feeble it cannot enforce its own writs in the face of any organized resistance, whether by provinces or by any of the dozen of Aboriginal tribes, or even by professional environmentalist lobbyists organized and funded outside of Canada. Why fritter away our resources in order to remain in association with eastern provinces so alien to us that demonizing Alberta, portraying its citizens as rustic, benighted, intolerant, selfish, climate-changing skeptics, indifferent to pollution, is the Liberals' most effective electoral strategy, as the recent election proved once again, and it worked. To borrow an argument made long ago by a friend of mine, if Alberta were already an independent republic, would we and think about this, if we were already an independent republic, would we apply to join the Confederation on the terms in which we currently serve? Yeah, it is laughable, the very idea. So why, I'm sorry? 1 minute, okay, I'm good. So why stay under those conditions? Why not leave? Canada's position internationally has become such a non-entity that any advantage of remaining with it, the advantages of remaining with it are nil, and there's some serious liabilities. Why stay? Now this I'll conclude with this, even though I got a lot of other wisdom to dispense. But why stay? This is a serious question, and it deserves a serious answer. Not vacuous platitudes, passionate rhetoric, and romantic sentiments, but sober, solid, rational analysis addressing the economic, moral, cultural, and political advantages of staying. I do not believe a case for staying can be made. I know I sure couldn't make it. If somebody offered me $1 million to make a case that would be at least as strong as the one I make in favor of leaving, I wouldn't even know where to begin. Would you? And whatever temporary dislocations would attend leaving are negligible compared to what we risk by doing nothing, allowing ourselves to be stripped of our wealth while being drawn ever further into the morass of central Canada. Let me skip to my last few lines, if I can get to that page. We need have no fear of what could be a great adventure, that is founding a new country. Think of becoming masters in our own political house. Is this not an enterprise that could engage the spirits of all Albertans, young and old? The only real obstacle is in ourselves, our misplaced sentimental attachment to a weak and pacific Canada at the expense of a potentially far more noble polity, a sovereign Alberta, truly strong and free.